few videos, we've been talking about how to adapt stories, and since we are going to keep diving deeper into the topic, I thought this was the perfect moment to make a comparison that many of you have been waiting for. Because on the horizon, we have some major productions coming, the new Harry Potter series, the Dune sequel, the Odyssey, Mortal Kombat 2, and Tomb Raider, and that remind us that adaptations are still on the most exciting and dangerous territories in modern cinema. And that's why today we are going to face two very different versions of one of the most iconic works in literature, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So, I'm going to split this analysis into two videos. In the first one, we'll analyze The Bride, written and directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal, and in the second video, we'll take a look at Guillermo del Toro version. So, get ready, because we're going to compare two completely different ways of bringing Frankenstein's monster back to the screen. Hello dear viewers, and welcome back. My name is Amilcar, and I am a sci-fi and dark fantasy author, and this is 4 Cents. Hollywood has us used to this emotional roller coaster every time they announce a new adaptation of one of our favorite works, or in this case of a classic. And that's precisely why I think it's a good idea to give some context about the origins of the original novel and its author before we dive into the analysis. Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, was written in 1818 by Mary Shelley. Although horror had already existed for decades thanks to Gothic novels, Frankenstein arrived and revolutionized everything by placing science at the center of horror, making a clear before and after in the genre. It was one of the first works to combine Gothic terror with modern science, such as galvanism and the idea of creating artificial life. This turned it into the bridge between classic supernatural horror and scientific horror, or what we now call science fiction horror. It humanized the monster. The being created by Victor Frankenstein is not just an evil villain, but a tragic, rejected, and suffering creature. This deepened the psychological and existential horror. It's introduced themes that still dominate the genre today: the dangers of scientific ambition, playing God, the creator's responsibility, isolation, discrimination, and the ethical limits of science. It had an enormous influence on later horror. Without Frankenstein, it's hard to imagine works like Dracula, 1897, Edgar Allan Poe's stories, The Stranger Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or much of the 20th century horror cinema from Universal Monsters to Hammer. It's worth noting that Mary Shelley published the novel anonymously. At that time, in the early 19th century, there was a strong prejudice against women writers, especially in genres considered serious, such as philosophy, science, or horror. As I mentioned before, the theme of the book, creating life and playing God, was quite controversial, so the anonymity also helped to protect her reputation. Besides, Mary Shelley was very young. She was between 18 and 20 years old when she wrote the novel. That youth could generate distrust, which is why her name didn't appear as the author until the second edition in 1823. Now that we have the context of the author and the original work, let's begin the analysis of The Bride. Okay, first, it's important to clarify that The Bride of Frankenstein was not part of Mary Shelley's novel, nor was it one of her works. In the original story, Victor Frankenstein began to create a bride for his monster, but destroyed her before finishing. It's only mentioned as a detail. It never actually happens. The Bride of Frankenstein was purely Hollywood creation, the 1935 film directed by James Whale more than a century after the novel. It is in that movie where the bride character was first appears fully formed and alive. We can say that this 1935 film is the real inspiration that led Maggie Gyllenhaal to write and direct her own adaptation. About The Bride, the movie. It's set in 1930s, specifically in 1936. The film tells the story of Ida, a young woman who is part of the group of girls who entertain the associates of the mafia boss Lupino. Now, what few know at the beginning is that Ida was secretly working as an informant. She was slowly leaking information against Lupino in an attempt to reopen the case of the woman who had made disappear and murdered. It is in that context that during a night at the club, Ida is possessed by the spirit of Mary Shelley, who uses her body to tell the story of Frankenstein's bride. While possessed, Ida begins to publicly denounce Lupino's crimes. As a result, Lupino's henchmen take her away, and during a struggle on the stairs, she falls and dies. Parallel to these events, the monster Frankenstein seeks help from Dr. Euphronius, who is a world-renowned scientist who had closely studied Dr. Frankenstein's work in the field of corpse reanimation. His goal, Frankenstein's monster, was to find a cure for his deep loneliness, that is, a bride. As a consequence, both of them exhume Ida's corpse and bring her back to life. The movie is 2 hours of feminist delirium, in which Ida, accompanied by Frankenstein, flees from a world that seeks to abuse and suffocate her. Every encounter with a man ended in an attempt to abuse her, from guys at a nightclub she was dancing with to a police officer. Ida was either starting some kind of female revolution or running for her safety, with literally no time to stop and understand who or what she was. This added to the fact that the reanimation she had lost her memories. And on top of that, inside her body coexists the consciousness of Ida and that of Mary Shelley, sometimes in harmony and sometimes in complete chaos. The movie is downright boring. It uses dramatic lighting contrasts that try to give it some depth, and there are several scenes where the characters literally became performers of the shows they're watching, all because of Frankenstein's obsession with an actor from that era. In my opinion, the film never tried to entertain. Instead, it tried to educate or straight up indoctrinate the audience with a discourse that felt extremely feminist, even for some feminist media outlet. I insist, throughout the entire movie, Ida, or Frankenstein's bride, is portrayed as the constant victim of a patriarchal and sexist society that doesn't allow women to breathe or stand out on their own. This message is repeated over and over and over again, using characters like a detective who had to pretend to be her partner's secretary just to be heard, and who, for the purpose of the film, was the only one capable of seeing what no one else could see. She always had the solution and answers delivered under the slogan, "I have a hunch." And the worst part is that the Frankenstein character comes across as an egoistic and cruel figure. He decided to love Penelope, the name he invented for Ida, and didn't hesitate for a second to create a fake past for her, constantly lying to her and putting his own interests and desires above hers at every moment. As a character, he simply seems to exist as another tool to express the director's vision that all men are violent monsters who must be hunted and segregated from society. And the worst thing of all is that As a man, what bothered me wasn't even the message, it was how boring the movie was. There were literally moments where absolutely nothing happened. The plot didn't move forward and was filled with filler scenes, musical numbers, or long dialogues from the protagonist while possessed by Mary Shelley. If I'm being honest, this movie reminds me of certain Polish independent films. I mean, existential, dense, that feel more like an hallucinogenic trip than an actual cinematic work. No, I wouldn't recommend this movie to anyone. And not because I think it's feminist or has an agenda, but simply because it's boring, pointless, and monotonous. What's more, its official description says it's inspired by the original work, when in reality, the only thing it takes from Mary Shelley's novel are the name Victor Frankenstein and the existence of the monster. Additionally, there were moments, especially when Dr. Euphronius was talking to herself during Ida's reanimation, where she used such grandiose and exaggerated pseudoscientific terms that sometimes they sounded more like childish, like a kid playing mad scientist, than the words of a real expert. As an author, I always appreciate when someone tries to do something bold and different. In this case, the idea of mixing Mary Shelley's Possession, 1930s Chicago, and Bonnie and Clyde style Runaway had interesting potential. However, the screenplay ultimately drowned its own message. It repeats the same idea of victimization and patriarchal oppression over and over again, without giving real space for the characters, especially the bride, to develop beyond that thematic function. For me, the possession of Mary Shelley it's not just a supernatural device. It's the way the director suggests that the original author wanted to tell a much bigger story. The story of a female monster who terrifies men precisely because she refused to be controlled. In this way, the film seems to propose that the rejection of feminism doesn't come only from hatred, but also from fear of a woman who finally has a voice and rage. On the other hand, there is a detail that creates a conflict for me and that I can't overlook. By presenting the monster as a figure that truly existed, the film turns Mary Shelley from a brilliant creator into a mere narrator or biographer of real events. Paradoxically, this takes away a lot of power from the original author. She goes from being the mind that invented one of the most powerful myths in literature to simply being the voice that tells a story that had already happened. In the end, the film's prioritizes its discourse over a solid, well-structured story. The filler scenes, stylistic detour, and lack of narrative momentum make the 2 hours feel much longer than they should. As an adaptation, it takes very little from the essence of Frankenstein and the original Bride, using only the name and premises to tell something completely different. In summary, as I said before, The Bride is not a movie I can recommend. If you are looking for an entertaining experience or a faithful adaptation in spirit to Mary Shelley, this isn't it. Personally, I have much higher expectations for Guillermo del Toro version, which promises a much deeper focus on the monster and the philosophical terms of the original novel. That video actually will be ready very soon. If you already seen The Bride, let me know in the comments what you thought about the screenplay and whether the message worked for you or felt repetitive as well. Don't forget to like if you enjoyed the analysis and subscribe for the second part on Del Toro's film. See you soon, thanks for your time, and bye bye.